mostly, but also I will connect to the U.S. to other matters as well. I will as well be paying attention sooner, uh, probably sooner rather than later, on Russia and China as well, obviously, and other empires out there, and their coalitions, I suppose, or just and the role they play in all this. So, uh, 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 as of right now, I'm just gonna get started with the progressive. Uh, uh, the progressive group or movement out there that seems to be dominating the waves of the internet right now, and I find them very interesting because there's a lot of there's a historical context to all this, and why it is that we find ourselves with this group called the progressives, fighting for I suppose libertarian ideas. Some may be regarded as left, or in quotes. Obviously, you got to put that in quotes. uh, as for the right, we will talk about that soon. But let's try to focus on this right now. Not to hate on progressives or anything here, but if anyone considers themselves a progressive, just take what I say and just try to use it in whatever way you can, I guess. And let's get started. So here I see what's being talked about today would be, let's see. Okay. While I talk about the progressive members of this movement, I will, or the progressive, I guess, goals of their party, the progressive goals, the progressive goals, and maybe what problems I see in them, and maybe and what may happen because of that, and talk about while I find what's being talked about today, because I haven't really been following what's been going on lately. So while I do that, I'm gonna go ahead and talk about the Cuban Cuban issue in Cuba, and the problem occurring in Cuba right now, considering another one of these I guess what is it? This new this new attempt to overthrow the government in Cuba, coming from a contractor for the U.S. Who allegedly was abused by the Revolutionary Army in Cuba because he seemed to have been detained for some time, and he seemed to have beaten his head on a table in a room where he believed he wasn't being recorded, but he was being recorded. So if anyone wants to go find that video, you could probably find it pretty quickly. Okay, so there's that. just real quick. Okay, so here we have. Let's talk about Bernie Sanders, right? Bernie Sanders, the socialist, and his other, um, and his and his followers in Congress, who are called socialists, but if anybody knows anything about socialism, is that most of these people are not socialists, and right off the bat, that is a big problem, because that's just a self, because it's not true. So, imagine what that's telling to young kids, that somehow this person, um, what this person who is a socialist who calls himself a socialist, is socialism, will more than likely believe. Should they really believe something that's not accurate? Even though it's called democratic socialism, or a social democracy, or a social democrat, is not a socialist. So, like, right off the bat, the media in cable news will have a lot of material to dissuade people from the real socialism that exists. So that's not good. So that's my take on the socialist part. One thing I'd like to mention about the presidential candidates up there today, or in these days, in my view, they all seem, to me, they all look like libertarians. I'm not even sure what a libertarian is these days, because from what I hear from libertarians, is they want small government, but at the same time they also like totalitarian states with constant surveillance. So, that's what all these people seem like to me, and as far as their proposals goes, I'm not really gonna get into right now. Okay, there's obviously the other front runner, who is a person with the with the majority of the vote right now, and the guy is obviously suffering from some mental issue. I mean, or at least my friends do think he's a joke. He's kind of a joke. So, I say have fun with him. I think he's got a lot of material in him. I'm sure we'll see a lot of interesting behaviors from him, to say the least. Okay, let's see. Okay, so now that I talked about that, I will talk a little bit about what you should expect from the right. Okay, so I've talked a little bit about them. I'll get back to them here in a little bit. I talked a little bit about the progressives. I'll get back to them in a little bit, after I tell you a small thing about the right. I really have no need to get on YouTube and watch Alex Jones, so I'm just gonna say that obviously everyone in the right, hard right, seems very out of antisocial and maybe even crazy. Some people might call crazy what some people might call crazy. But the fact is that the right is not to be underestimated, and they are actually much smarter and much more adaptable to succeed on the internet than whoever these progressives are. Mainly why you'll more than likely find out if you continue watching or if you continue listening and to these clips I will be making. So yes, they are more adaptable to gain popularity on the internet than the progressives. Why? Because the right is a little more logical and actually reacts a little more pretty normally to the things people talk about. I mean, people say, well, why don't they want Medicare for all, or stuff like that. Well, it's not that they don't want Medicare for all. They know you guys want it. It's just that they are able to see a little differently than most. And we'll get to the problem. The right is actually a lot more deceitful and able to manipulate people in a very significant way that gains a lot of support, whether consciously or subconsciously, by the people they represent. So, future videos, and we'll talk about that. And I mean, we'll talk about that in future clips. It should come soon. I'm thinking about making several of these, so it should be out sooner or later. So I'm just gonna focus on the progressives, and I'm gonna talk about them first. Mainly because of their inadequacy to see what they represent in history. So many of them say, "Oh, we're making history. We're gonna get all this stuff done. This great stuff, Medicare for all, many other programs that I'm sure you know they can be used, in a social way, such as public housing and welfare in general, and it's not that I have a problem with any of those proposals. It's just that, historically speaking, these proposals usually end up blowing up. So something about the progressives. Okay, so these people claim they stand for minorities and other vulnerable people in the world. But I always seem to ask the question, why is it that these are the people, these progressives, that end up in these shows, these popular shows? Isn't it logical that the system or the structure that they're working in only enables false pretenses and more disinformation? So why would, in the structure that only seems to benefit the privileged, So logically speaking, the only thing I can really think of with these progressives and how they've reached this level of popularity is because they are or are asking for more privilege, or are privileged individuals themselves. I'm sure, and sooner or later we'll get to specifics, but right now I'm just generalizing and talking about them as a group. And that's that's what's happening. So the progressives as a group say they're standing. So they say they're standing up for minorities, at the same time gaining tons of popularity and getting sponsors and uh, shout outs and donations and promotions, um, which to me never really seems to equate to reality. So my view is that most of these people are being played. These progressives are being played by YouTube and by the right as well, because obviously the right knows how to use YouTube in a very efficient way, and they're being played. They're just the people being manipulated. And what they seem to me is that they're being manipulated, and they're. I feel like they're there to garner support from young people and allow young people to flourish in the political structure so that is in the U.S. Is obviously the future is young people, so somehow, some way, young people need some group to attach themselves to. And what better group than these people, right? And at the same time, most of them are also they're all white. Uh, most these people call themselves the left, quotes in quotes, are white. They are not minorities. And what makes them capable of no understanding what it is to be a minority if most of these people are literally bolstered up into these positions uh, through the American system. So it just seems like a total sham, and it makes me and it's disappointing that they don't say the truth. They don't give all the facts and historical context in which most young people live today, and people in general. Um, so, it's very optimistic at this point. Obviously, they're looking to vote, uh, change their situation. And though they do want to change their situation, and they may succeed somewhat, it is at the same time wishful thinking. Um, and you may be asking, why do you say that? Well, if you listen to what most of these people, the words that these progressives use, it's very odd. To me, it can be very odd. Like phrases like the military-industrial complex. Okay, I what that mean. What that means. Do you mean the corporations? Do you mean the philosophical part that of domination? Or what exactly is the thing that people use that word for. It's constantly being used. Kind of loses its meaning after a while, and then inevitably inevitably people will move to a different word. So there's that, and then there's things, a lot of history that these progressives ignore. Why do they ignore this history, you ask? Well, all empires want to control their population, and to do so, you basically give them a whitewashed history, or an edited history of what really happened. Even if that means giving a little bit of truth and a little bit of truth and a little bit of truth, as long as it's never the actual truth. So along the way, these progressives, as intelligent as they may be, they still don't understand the very basics of mind control. And one of those basics is to edit history, to make history, to control history. And to predict the future. And that one way to do that is to definitely bombard people who consider themselves, quote, the left, quote, and somewhat believable information, until inevitably the group begins to work dysfunctionally and self-negates itself at every discussion, and an important discussion. Thus making the progressives believe anything they've ever said in the past, even if they know it's not true. If you were to tell one of these progressives the real history of what's been happening, the raw history that's happened during just the past 100 years, they would more than likely not believe you, or call you the establishment, if it does not agree with what they've been saying. So there's your first flaw, or several flaws if you want to be specific, but clearly something to watch out for. And that's something they will never do, by the way. Like I said, they won't believe it, even if you told them this is the first step towards mind control. To make these people believe something that's not true. And that's basically what they've done. And at the same time, not only do they just blatantly not know about the real history, some of them outright ignore it, or just don't have enough time to understand that Nordic countries are growing even more fascistic. Yeah, so they basically ignore the history, or they just don't have enough time to do some research, and understand that Nordic countries are themselves becoming more fascist. So, yeah. And at the end of the day, when things blow up, these progressives are not gonna stand up for black and indigenous people. Uh, the only people they're really gonna stand up for are for those who have been, or those who support their methods of governing. So, yeah. And by the way, I'd also like to mention that in Norway, there is a fascistic party by the name of the Progress Party. So, we'll take a look at that next time. Goodbye.